Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? The night stretched long and empty ahead of me, the Tulane highway rolling under my tires like a black ribbon unraveling endlessly. The only lights came from my high beams, illuminating the cracked asphalt and the occasional, lonesome reflector posts. My fingers gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as I exhaled, glancing at the time on the dashboard, 1:12 a.m. I should have stopped hours ago, but stopping meant spending the night in some rundown motel, possibly with questionable hygiene and even more questionable guests. Instead, I figured I'd power through, get to the next town, and crash in the RV. I'd done it before. The rhythmic hum of the road usually had a way of lulling me into a trance, letting the miles slip by unnoticed. Tonight felt different. It wasn't exhaustion. I'd had my fair share of all-night drives, fueled by convenience store coffee and the white noise of AM talk radio. This was something else, a creeping awareness. I turned down the volume on the radio, letting the familiar drone of static fill the cabin. The last station I'd tuned into had cut out completely about 20 miles back, fading into white noise like a ghost slipping through my fingers. Normally, I'd scan for another station, but the static was preferable. It was predictable, safe. Outside, the road was still. No headlights in my rearview mirror, no approaching taillights ahead. Just me and the dark highway stretching beyond my sight. And the billboards. They'd been appearing more frequently now. Massive, skeletal frames standing in the void, glowing from dim floodlights like relics of a forgotten era. Most of them were weathered and peeling, ads for long-shuttered diners, motels boasting color TVs, and one that simply read, Exit 227, gas, food, lodging. I'd seen them before, reassuring in their way. They meant civilization was still out there somewhere, even if I was miles from it. Then I saw the next billboard. It stood taller than the others, positioned right at the bend of the road, forcing my eyes to it. A chill crawled up my spine before I even registered why. Something about the lighting, the placement, it felt intentional, like it wanted to be seen. The sign itself was simple, plain white text on a black background. No advertisements, no brand names. Keep driving, my name. I almost slammed on the brakes. My hands went ice cold, and a sharp breath left my lips before I could stop it. I forced myself to blink, to look again, convinced I had misread it. Maybe I was seeing things, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But it was still there. Keep driving, my name. My stomach dropped. I gritted my teeth, forcing my pulse to slow down, rationalizing it the way I always did when something didn't make sense. Maybe it was a marketing gimmick. Some fancy digital sign that pulled names from GPS data or something. Personalized ads weren't exactly new. Hell, social media fed me eerily specific ads all the time. Why should this be any different? Except it was different, because I was the only one on this road, because there was no GPS connected to my RV, because the billboard had no digital screen. I swallowed hard, my knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. I wouldn't let it get to me. I'd laugh about this in the morning, maybe tell someone about the creepy billboard I saw in the middle of nowhere. Maybe. For now, I just needed to keep driving. The road stretched on, and I tried to shake off the unease pressing against my chest. The logical part of my brain kept working through possibilities. Maybe I misread it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone with my name put up a weird joke billboard for a friend. But as much as I tried to focus on those explanations, the unease lingered. I turned the radio back up, but all I got was static. The same hollow white noise, the sound of nothing and everything all at once. Another billboard appeared in the distance. My breath hitched. I didn't want to look. I forced my eyes straight ahead, but the glow of the floodlights pulled my gaze. I had to look. The words flashed at me in stark, white letters. Don't ignore me. My pulse slammed against my ribs. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. This one was closer to the road. Lower, almost as if whoever put it there wanted to make sure I saw it. I tried to shake off the paranoia creeping in, gripping the wheel harder as I sped up. I passed the sign in a blur, my heart pounding against my ribs. No, I was done with this. There was an explanation. There had to be. Another sign. Up ahead. Larger this time. Closer. Almost waiting for me. Look in the rear view. The breath left my body in a silent gasp. I clamped down on my panic, but I could feel it clawing its way up my throat, sinking cold talons into my chest. I didn't want to. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel. Don't look, I told myself not to, but my body moved on instinct. Slowly, hesitantly, my eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. Darkness. Only the empty road behind me. Nothing else. I exhaled shakily, my heart still hammering. I had to get a grip. I was scaring myself over nothing. Then the radio crackled. The static shifted, like something was moving inside it. A whisper, faint and distant, threading through the white noise. I turned the dial, trying to find a station, but the whisper grew louder. The next billboard loomed ahead, closer than the others, like it had been waiting for me. My stomach twisted as I read the words. IT sees you. A shudder rippled through my spine, and for the first time since this started, I felt truly afraid. I slammed my foot on the gas. James tried to shake off the unease from the first message. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone had programmed rotating advertisements that just happened to match his situation. He knew that was unlikely. How many other drivers on this deserted stretch of road were debating turning back home? But he forced himself to move on. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, turning up the radio to drown out the nagging thoughts. Static crackled before settling into an old rock station. He focused on the rhythm of the song, tapping his fingers on the wheel. A few miles later, another billboard loomed ahead. His stomach clenched involuntarily as his eyes darted up to the glowing screen. The message changed right as he approached. That song. She used to love it, didn't she? James almost slammed on the brakes. His hands clenched the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. That song. It was an old favorite of Emily's, one she used to hum under her breath absent-mindedly. He hadn't heard it in years. It was an innocent detail, but paired with the billboards, it sent a chill through his spine. He turned off the radio. James tried to rationalize it. Billboards used algorithms, right? Some had motion sensors. Maybe this stretch of highway had some experimental AI-powered ad system. Maybe. Another billboard. James' breath caught in his throat as the screen flickered, loading a new message just for him. Turn around. Last chance. The letters were large, bold, and glaring against the dark sky. It felt like a warning. James swallowed hard, forcing himself to focus on the road. He wasn't going to let paranoia get to him. This was just a prank. Some kind of marketing stunt. He pressed harder on the gas pedal. The night seemed darker now. The trees on either side of the highway blurred together into an endless black void. The yellow lane dividers glowed under his headlights, the only thing tethering him to reality. Another sign approached. James forced himself not to look, keeping his eyes locked on the road. But as he passed it, he caught a glimpse of the words in his peripheral vision. You can't ignore me. His pulse spiked. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just technology messing with him. Someone, or something, knew he was here. James felt a strange shift in the air inside the RV. It wasn't just cold, it was charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The hum of the tires on the road sounded distant, like he was driving through a tunnel. His ears rang slightly. A faint, acrid scent filled his nostrils. Burnt plastic? No, something metallic. Almost like blood. He sniffed again, but it was gone. James shook his head, trying to clear it. His fingers felt numb where they gripped the wheel. His reflection in the rearview mirror caught his attention. His eyes looked darker, sunken. Had he been driving that long? Then movement. In the mirror. For a fraction of a second, James swore he saw a shadow in the back of the RV. His foot slammed the brakes. The RV skidded to a stop, tires screeching against the empty highway. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He twisted in his seat, eyes scanning the dimly lit interior of the RV. Nothing. Just the same cramped space. The kitchenette. The unmade bed. The empty passenger seat. His breath came fast and ragged. He was losing it. He had to be. James forced himself to breathe. In, out. Slow. He needed to pull himself together. But then he noticed something. Outside the windshield, just up ahead. Another billboard. It was waiting for him. James didn't want to look, but his eyes were drawn to it, helpless. The message was different this time. Don't look in the mirror again. A cold sweat broke out along his neck. James reached up and tilted the rearview mirror away from his line of sight. He didn't want to see whatever might be lurking there. His hands trembled as he put the RV back into drive. The vehicle rumbled forward, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Maybe it was stress. He had been driving too long. Highway hypnosis was real. Maybe his mind was just filling in blanks, creating paranoia out of exhaustion. Yes, that had to be it. He pulled out his phone and searched for information on the billboards. No results. No articles, no local news about strange advertisements. No marketing gimmicks. Nothing. James licked his dry lips. He went to call Emily, just to hear a familiar voice, but hesitated. What was he even going to say? Hey, the billboards on this highway know my name. They know my past. They know my thoughts. She'd think he was crazy. Maybe he was. He set the phone down. His fingers tightened around the wheel. Another sign loomed ahead. His breath caught as the words shifted, forming slowly as though written by an unseen hand. Don't bother calling her. She won't pick up. James' fingers went numb. His heart pounded so hard it echoed in his skull. No, that was impossible. Before he could stop himself, he grabbed his phone and hit call. It rang once, twice. Voicemail. James slammed the phone onto the dashboard, his hands shaking. A new billboard was already waiting for him in the distance. I told you. He let out a shaky breath. He wasn't alone on this road. Something was watching. Something was waiting. And it knew him better than he knew himself. James gripped the steering wheel, so hard his knuckles turned white. He focused on his breathing, trying to steady himself. The billboards were playing mind games with him. That was all. There had to be a logical explanation. There had to be. He forced himself to drive faster, leaving the last sign behind. The night stretched before him, the empty road illuminated only by his headlights. He kept glancing at the GPS, half expecting it to glitch or start displaying something impossible. But it remained normal. Still, the eerie sense of being watched didn't fade. His fingers hovered over the radio dial, hesitating before turning the volume back up. A crackling hum filled the speakers. Then a voice. Not a commercial. Not a DJ. A voice that whispered, "You shouldn't have ignored me." James slammed the radio off. The sound hadn't been part of any broadcast. He was sure of it. His hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. He needed to get a grip. He needed to focus. But then, just ahead, another billboard. The moment his headlights hit it, the words changed. "You can still turn back." James swallowed hard. No, he wasn't turning back. He wasn't giving in to some sick game. He drove past it, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. Then, in his peripheral vision, the billboard changed again. Just before he left it behind, he caught the new message. "Now you've made a mistake." A chill ran down his spine. The RV felt different now. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if the air inside had thickened. The dashboard lights flickered. James rubbed his eyes, exhaustion gnawing at him, but then, something thumped. A dull, heavy thump from the roof of the RV. He stiffened. The road was empty. There were no bridges, no trees hanging low enough to scrape against the vehicle. Then another thump, like something shifting. His pulse spiked. He glanced at the rearview mirror, but caught himself before adjusting it. The last billboard's message rang in his head. "Don't look in the mirror again." James forced himself to keep his eyes on the road. Maybe it was just debris. Maybe. Another thump. Louder. Closer to the windshield now. Then scraping. Something dragging its weight across the roof. His breath hitched. He tightened his grip on the wheel, heart hammering as a new billboard loomed ahead. The words burned into the night. "It's on the roof." James swerved violently. The RV lurched, tires screeching as he barely kept control. His breath came in short gasps. What the hell was happening? His stomach twisted as he looked up through the windshield, and saw a shadow shift across the top of the RV. James' hands shook as he reached for his phone. He needed to call someone. Anyone. He hesitated before dialing Emily. Would she even believe him? The phone rang. One ring. Two. Three. A soft click. Then silence. Then breathing. Slow. Shallow. James' pulse pounded in his ears. "Em." His voice barely worked. No answer. But the breathing continued. Then, "You're almost there." The call cut out. James yanked the phone away, staring at the screen. No caller ID. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowing him in darkness. Another billboard. The words glowed as he passed. "You're not talking to her." His stomach lurched. His hands went cold. He couldn't do this anymore. He had to pull over. He needed to stop. James pulled the RV onto the shoulder, the tires crunching against gravel. He shut the engine off. Silence swallowed him whole. His hands ached from gripping the wheel. His eyes burned from the strain of the road. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling shakily. Maybe he just needed a moment. Maybe. Tap. James froze. The sound came from the passenger side window. His breath hitched. He turned his head, slowly, muscles tense. Outside, the highway was empty. There was nothing there. Then, Tap, tap, tap. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Right against the glass. His heart jackhammered against his ribs. Then, in the reflection of the window, he saw it. A figure. Standing just outside the RV. James didn't turn around. He couldn't. Instead, his gaze flicked forward, toward the windshield. A new billboard stood ahead, illuminated in the distance. It had been blank before. Now, as if responding to his terror, it changed. The letters appeared slowly. Do not open the door. James clenched his jaw, his entire body screaming at him to move. He turned the key in the ignition. The RV sputtered, but didn't start. Tap, tap, tap. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. His fingers fumbled with the key again. The engine whined, then roared to life. The second it did, the tapping stopped. James didn't hesitate. He threw the RV into drive and peeled back onto the highway, gravel spraying behind him. He didn't look back, but in the rearview mirror, just before he tilted it away, for a fraction of a second, he saw something standing in the middle of the road, watching him leave. And as he sped away, a final billboard appeared ahead. Its words made his blood run cold. You should have never stopped. James's foot was pressed flat against the accelerator. He had no destination, just a single desperate goal: get away. The RV's engine roared, the headlights carving a path through the dark, endless highway. The billboards were still there, flashing their cryptic messages, but he refused to look. He wouldn't let them get into his head again. But then, up ahead, looming over the road, a massive billboard stretched across the horizon, larger than any he'd seen before. A shiver of dread crawled up his spine. The letters scrawled across it, changing before his eyes. This is your last chance, James. James clenched his jaw. No, he wasn't playing along. But before he could drive past, the letters flickered and changed again. If you keep driving, you will never escape. His grip on the wheel tightened. Then, the next billboard glowed in the distance. His heart slammed against his ribs as the words burned into his mind. Stop now or lose everything. Something about it felt different. Urgent. Not a warning. A threat. James let out a shaky breath. His thoughts raced. If he kept going, he would be playing right into whatever this thing wanted. But if he stopped... No, he couldn't stop. He forced his gaze back to the road. That's when he saw it. Just ahead, standing in the middle of the road. A figure. It wasn't human. Not exactly. It was tall, unnaturally so, its elongated limbs stretching in a way that defied logic. Its skin was pale, almost reflective, like it was absorbing the glow from the billboards. And its face. There wasn't one. Just a smooth, featureless surface. James's stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed, don't stop, but if he hit it, his breath came in short gasps. He couldn't swerve. There was no time. He braced for impact. But the moment his headlights touched the figure, it disappeared, vanished. James's blood ran cold. A new billboard ahead flashed with a single sentence. Look in the passenger seat. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He didn't want to. He knew he shouldn't. But his eyes moved, and he saw it. Something was sitting next to him. James's breath hitched. His hands shook on the wheel. It wasn't moving, just sitting. Its body was hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if it was studying him. The air in the RV felt wrong. Heavy, suffocating. Then slowly it began to turn its head toward him. James slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, tires screeching against the pavement. The second he stopped, his ears rang with silence. He didn't dare look beside him, didn't dare move. A flicker of light ahead made his stomach drop. Another billboard. It was so bright, it felt like the only source of light in the entire world. Its words burned into the night. You shouldn't have stopped. A breath. Not his. Right beside him. James's entire body seized with fear. And then, the thing beside him spoke. A voice not human. Not right, but familiar. It sounded like him. You were supposed to listen. James's breath shattered. His hand flew to the ignition. The moment he turned the key, the RV wasn't on the road anymore. James gasped. The asphalt was gone. The stars, the highway, everything was gone. Instead, he was driving through nothing. The RV floated in a void. A world of shifting static, like he had driven straight into the screen of a broken television. And ahead, the largest billboard yet. Massive, stretching into infinity. A final message. Welcome home. James let out a ragged scream. The entity beside him turned fully. And now it had his face. The last thing James saw was his own reflection grinning back at him. Then the billboard erased him. James's scream never fully left his throat. The moment the billboard's message, "Welcome home," burned itself into his mind, reality itself seemed to fold inward. And then, darkness. Not the kind that comes with nightfall. This was an absence of everything. A place without light, without sound, without time. James's breath hitched in his throat. Was he dead? No. His hands still gripped the steering wheel, his legs still pressed against the pedals, his chest still rose and fell in rapid, panicked gasps. He was here. But where was here? The RV wasn't moving anymore. The engine had gone silent. His headlights gone. The dashboard blank. Like the vehicle had been reduced to an empty shell around him. James swallowed, throat dry and raw. Then, a flicker. Not light. Not sound. A sensation. Like someone, something, was sitting in the dark with him. Watching. Waiting. And then just ahead, a glow blossomed into existence. A billboard. Floating in the void. No poles holding it up. No road leading to it. Just there. And on its screen, words began to form. Don't panic. James's hands trembled. His breath came out in sharp, erratic bursts. Don't panic? Was this some kind of joke? His heart thundered against his ribs as the words on the billboard shifted. Do you understand now? James's fingers curled into the steering wheel. His jaw clenched. Understand what? That he had been lured here? That the billboards had been controlling him from the start? That no matter what choice he had made, this was where he was always going to end up? There is no escape. James squeezed his eyes shut. No, that wasn't possible. This had to be a nightmare, a hallucination. There had to be something he could do. He reached for the ignition, twisting the key so hard it nearly snapped. Nothing. He slammed his foot against the gas pedal. Nothing. His breathing grew shallow. The words on the billboard flickered again. We are not cruel. James let out a bitter, broken laugh. Oh really? Not cruel? They had toyed with him, hunted him, rewritten the rules of reality itself. And now what? They wanted to reassure him? The billboard shifted again. We only want what you want. James's stomach twisted. His lips parted, but no words came. What he wanted? He wanted to wake up. He wanted to go home. He wanted to forget any of this ever happened. Then forget. The words came fast. Urgent. James's pulse quickened. You don't have to remember. You can be happy. James's hands shook. His mind warred against itself. The horror of his situation threatened to crush him. But beneath it, whispering from some dark, tired part of his brain, a single desperate thought. Maybe I should. Maybe I should just forget. All you have to do is let go. The glow from the billboard softened, like it was offering something gentle, comforting. James's eyelids felt heavy. His thoughts slowed. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe if he forgot, if he let them take this away, if he let himself slip into whatever reality they were offering, it wouldn't hurt anymore. Maybe he would wake up somewhere else, somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. Maybe he wouldn't be afraid anymore. James opened his eyes. Sunlight, warm, golden light streaming through the windshield. The highway stretched ahead of him, normal as ever. His heart lurched. The RV was still moving, cruising down the road like nothing had happened. The radio buzzed softly. A clear blue sky arched above him. James sucked in a sharp breath. Had it really been a dream? He lifted one shaking hand, rubbing at his face. His skin was clammy, cold, but he was here, alive. A hysterical, relieved laugh tumbled out of him. God, he had never been so happy to see a boring, endless stretch of highway. He had been hallucinating. It was exhaustion, stress. He had imagined all of it. James exhaled long and slow. It was over. He let himself sink back into the seat, his body still humming with tension. Just as he reached for his water bottle, a flash of color caught his eye. His gaze snapped to the side of the road. A billboard, one he had never seen before. At first, it looked like an ordinary ad, some vague promotion for a fast food joint. But then, the words shifted, right before his eyes. His stomach dropped. The message burned into his mind with horrifying clarity. Did you really think it would be that easy? The world tilted. The road seemed to stretch infinitely ahead of him. A terrible certainty crawled into his gut. He wasn't awake. He wasn't free. He had never escaped at all. James's breathing turned ragged. His hands felt wrong on the steering wheel. His body, wrong inside the RV. Because deep down he knew. This wasn't reality. not the one he belonged to. He had made a choice. He had forgotten something. And now he would never know what. The billboards had won. They had rewritten his life. And whatever they had turned him into, he would never remember what he used to be. Another billboard flashed ahead. His eyes locked onto it, helpless to look away. "Keep driving, James." And this time, he obeyed. Next story. It started on a highway that barely looked like a highway at all. Long, empty stretches of cracked asphalt. The yellow divider lines faded nearly to nothing, cutting through miles of nothingness. I had been driving for hours, just me, my RV, and the dim glow of my dashboard lights. The sun had dipped below the horizon a while ago, and the last town I passed was nothing more than a boarded-up gas station and a single flickering streetlight. I wasn't lost. Not exactly. I had planned this road trip as an escape from my stagnant life. No deadlines, no responsibilities, just me and the road, letting my thoughts drift as I made my way toward nowhere in particular. The map app on my phone had been guiding me, but somewhere along the way, the signal dropped, leaving me to follow the road signs instead. That's when I saw it. A rest stop loomed ahead, emerging from the darkness like something forgotten by time. It sat just off the road, tucked between skeletal trees that swayed in the evening breeze. The whole place had an abandoned feel. No cars in the lot, no humming neon lights. A couple of rusted gas pumps stood near the entrance, their hoses curling like dead snakes. The convenience store behind them was nothing but boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls. And then there was the payphone. It stood near the edge of the parking lot, just outside the glow of a broken street lamp. Old, rusted, with peeling paint and a receiver that hung slightly askew. I almost didn't notice it until it rang. A shrill, piercing sound that cut through the silence like a blade. It startled me so badly that I jerked the wheel slightly, my tires skidding against the gravel shoulder before I steadied myself. I stared at the payphone as I passed. The ringing continued, relentless, as if calling out specifically to me. But that was impossible. No one used payphones anymore. Not out here. Not in the middle of nowhere. It must be some kind of automatic system, I told myself. A glitch. A line left active by mistake. That was the only explanation that made sense. Still, my heart pounded harder than it should have, and my hands felt clammy against the steering wheel as I drove on, leaving the rest stop behind. But something didn't sit right. As the road stretched ahead, swallowed by darkness, a nagging thought wormed its way into my mind. Who would be calling a payphone out here? And more importantly, who was supposed to answer? I shook off the feeling and kept driving. The miles rolled on, and I forced myself to focus on the road. Then maybe half an hour later, it happened again. Another rest stop. Another payphone. And the moment my headlights swept past it, it rang. I swore under my breath, gripping the wheel tighter. My stomach twisted with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. I slowed down this time, enough to get a better look at the rest stop. Just like the first, it was old and lifeless. The same rusted-out gas pumps, the same boarded-up store, and the same payphone, standing in the same exact spot. A chill ran down my spine. I must be imagining things. There was no way it could be the same rest stop. I had driven miles beyond it, and yet everything about this place was identical, including the ringing. It was insistent, almost urgent, like whoever was on the other end knew I was there. Like they were waiting. I swallowed hard. Maybe I should just stop. Just pick it up, prove to myself that there was a logical explanation for all of this. But every part of me resisted the idea. Instead, I hit the gas, leaving the rest stop behind. I told myself I wouldn't stop for the night, that I'd keep going until I reached another town, or at least a real gas station with lights and people. But exhaustion weighed heavy in my bones, and before long, I started seeing road signs that didn't make sense. They were the same signs I had already passed. Rest stop 2 miles ahead. My stomach sank. That wasn't possible. I had just passed a rest stop nearly half an hour ago. I must have missed another turn. Maybe I was driving in circles. But when the headlights caught movement ahead, my breath caught in my throat. It was the same rest stop, the same gas pumps, the same boarded windows, the same damn payphone. And the moment I saw it, it rang. My whole body tensed. My skin felt like it was crawling, like invisible fingers were dragging themselves along my spine. I pulled into the lot this time, hands trembling as I put the RV in park. The ringing had not stopped. I stared at the payphone, my heart hammering. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The receiver dangled slightly, swaying even though there was no wind. It was waiting. I stepped out of the RV, the night air cold against my skin. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I slowly approached the phone. The ringing grew louder, sharper. I hesitated for only a moment before I reached out and picked up the receiver. Silence. No dial tone. No static. Just nothing. I frowned. Hello? At first, there was no response. And then just as I was about to hang up, I heard it. A breath. Slow, steady, and too close. I jerked the phone away from my ear, my pulse skyrocketing. The receiver was heavy in my grip, the plastic cold and damp. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing nearby. But the lot was empty. The night was still. The breath had sounded real, like someone had been right there, inches away, exhaling directly into my ear. A click, then a dial tone. I dropped the phone. It swung from the cord, thudding against the metal booth. My instincts screamed at me to run. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned, bolted back to the RV, and peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop driving for another hour. My hands were still shaking. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I kept the radio on for comfort, but it only picked up static. My phone had no signal. No GPS. Just nothing. But the worst part, the moment I glanced at my side mirror, my stomach dropped. Because behind me, the payphone was still there. Not in the distance. Not fading into the dark. Right there, at the edge of the road. And though I couldn't hear it, I knew. It was ringing. The highway stretched on ahead, endless and empty, but deep down, I already knew the truth. I wasn't getting away. Not from this. The next day, I told myself I had imagined it. Long drives at night mess with your senses. Shadows stretch in strange ways. Distant sounds echo when they shouldn't, and headlights play tricks on tired eyes. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the highway stretched on endlessly, I found myself dreading that particular stretch of road. I wasn't planning on stopping again, not after what had happened last night. My gas tank was still sitting at 3/4 full, and I had no need to pull over. But as I approached the area where the rusted payphone sat, an odd weight settled in my stomach. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. Don't look at it, just drive past. But the moment my RV neared the rest stop, a sound cut through the hum of the tires against the pavement. Re-thawing. My breath caught in my throat. The ringing phone. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was coming from that same, rusted-out payphone. The problem was, I wasn't stopped this time. I was still driving. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to keep my eyes ahead. The rest stop blurred in my peripheral vision, but the ringing didn't stop. It followed me. I drove faster, my hands sweating against the wheel. The ringing didn't fade behind me as expected. It matched my speed. Only when I rounded the next bend did the sound finally cut off, leaving behind an eerie, stretching silence. I exhaled shakily. Just my imagination. Maybe there's some weird signal interference. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I should have taken a different route. The second encounter. That night, I stopped at a small roadside diner. A neon sign buzzed above the windows, flickering slightly, casting a red glow over the cracked pavement. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and overcooked bacon. I ordered a sandwich and forced myself to eat, trying to push the creeping paranoia aside. Just stress. That's all it is. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a cigarette tucked behind her ear, noticed my nerves. "Long drive?" she asked, setting down a cup of coffee. "Yeah," I muttered. She nodded knowingly. "Night driving will do that to you. Always feels like the road is watching you." I stiffened slightly at that. Before I could respond, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A phone ringing. It wasn't coming from inside the diner. I turned my head toward the window, my heartbeat hammering. Across the parking lot, beneath a dim street lamp, sat an old payphone, its receiver dangling, swaying slightly in the breeze. And it was ringing. The waitress followed my gaze and frowned. "Huh, that thing hasn't worked in years." I swallowed hard. "Then why is it ringing?" She shrugged. "Probably a wiring issue. Or some static from the old lines. Nobody ever answers it." I stared at the phone, dread coiling tight in my gut. "Nobody?" I echoed. She shook her head. "Not a single person." That didn't comfort me, because last night I almost had. More than coincidence. I left the diner as soon as I could, my appetite completely gone. As I slid into the driver's seat of my RV, my hands were trembling. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I just sat there, staring through the windshield at the payphone across the lot. It had stopped ringing. The silence was worse. A thought crept into my mind. something I had tried to ignore all evening. It's following me. That didn't make sense, though. It was impossible. But then why had I heard it at both stops? Why had it rung when I was driving? I turned the key in the ignition, eager to put as much distance between me and that payphone as possible. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I made a decision. I'd take a different route. No more rest stops. No more eerie gas stations. I'd find a motel, sleep for a few hours, and put this whole thing behind me. But as I merged back onto the highway, the road ahead stretched long and endless, and an uneasy feeling crept into my bones. Because somehow, deep down, I already knew. I wasn't done with the payphone. Not yet. Another wrong turn. I drove for nearly an hour, pushing past the exhaustion. The road signs were sparse, and the darkness pressed in around me. I just needed to find a motel. But the farther I drove, the more something felt off. I saw familiar landmarks. A half-crushed road sign. A bent guardrail. A rusted-out car that had clearly been abandoned for decades. I had already passed these things before. The sick realization settled in my gut. I wasn't getting farther away. I was looping back. Panic set in as I gripped the wheel, my mind racing for an explanation. Had I taken a wrong turn? Was my GPS messing up? And then, up ahead, something familiar came into view. A small, desolate rest stop. A single, flickering street lamp. And a rusted-out payphone, standing alone in the dim glow. My breath caught in my throat. I had driven in a straight line. I had taken no turns. But I was back here, re-thawing. The payphone started ringing. Escalation of fear. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding past it. The ringing grew louder. It echoed inside the RV, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner, until I swore it was ringing inside my own skull. I clutched the wheel, my knuckles white. The highway blurred around me as I pushed my RV past 70, 80, desperate to get away. And then, silence. The ringing stopped. The highway stretched on ahead, empty and quiet. The rest stop was gone, swallowed by the night. I let out a shuddering breath. My pulse still pounded, but I forced myself to calm down. It's over. But then, from the passenger seat, mere inches from me, re-thawing, my blood turned to ice. I turned my head, dread pooling in my stomach. Lying on the seat beside me, where nothing should have been, a payphone receiver, old, yellowed, cracked with age. And it was ringing. My shaking hands gripped the wheel tighter, but I didn't move. Because suddenly, something else dawned on me. The phone cord. It didn't dangle loosely. It stretched taut, leading somewhere. I swallowed hard, slowly shifting my gaze toward the back of the RV. And that's when I saw it. In the dark reflection of the rear window, a shape. Someone standing inside my RV. The receiver in my RV. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The receiver sat on my passenger seat, its cracked surface illuminated by the soft green glow of the dashboard lights. The phone cord, impossibly long, stretched into the darkness behind me, vanishing somewhere in the back of my RV. And someone was back there. I saw the shape reflected in the rear window. A figure, standing perfectly still, barely visible in the dim light. The phone kept ringing. I swallowed, forcing air into my lungs. My hands were frozen on the steering wheel, my knuckles aching from how tightly I gripped it. This wasn't possible. The payphone had been at the rest stop. It had been outside. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't picked up anything. But now it was inside my RV. And I wasn't alone. The ringing was shrill, relentless, each chime slamming against my skull like a warning. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't turn around. But the presence behind me, it was waiting. Watching. I could feel it, a crushing weight pressing against the back of my neck, an unspoken demand. Answer it. I reached out with a shaking hand, fingers brushing against the cold, plastic receiver. I hesitated. Then slowly I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. What's on the other end? For a moment, there was only silence. Not dead air. Not static. Just silence. I waited, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. Then I heard it. Not a voice. Not words. Breathing. Shallow. Ragged. Right next to my ear. It wasn't coming from the receiver. It was coming from behind me. A sharp, cold whisper slithered through the phone line. Don't look. Every muscle in my body locked up. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my foot still pressed hard on the gas pedal. The highway blurred past in streaks of white and yellow, but I couldn't focus. The voice on the other end, it wasn't distant. It wasn't crackling through an old, broken payphone. It was close, like whoever, whatever, was right behind me, its breath touching my skin. "Don't look!" I wanted to scream. The weight of something unseen bore down on me. A presence at my back, towering, unmoving. If I turned around, I knew I'd see it. But I couldn't, because I knew if I saw its face, I wouldn't survive it. Driving blind. My vision swam tunnel-like. I couldn't focus on the road anymore. I forced my mind to work through the sheer, suffocating terror. What do? The payphone. It hadn't hurt me. It had just called me. It was trying to make me listen. I had answered. So maybe if I played along. Click. The call ended. My heart slammed against my ribs. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing. I squeezed my eyes shut for just a second. Breathe. Just breathe. Then slowly, I lowered the receiver from my ear. My fingers were still wrapped around the plastic handle, my grip trembling. I had two choices. Drop the receiver. Pretend none of this was happening. Turn around. Face whatever was behind me. I didn't want to choose. I didn't get to choose. Because before I could do anything, the phone cord moved. Something's in here with me. It slithered. Not like a wire. Not like something plastic and dead. It coiled. Like it was alive. The cord twisted, shifting over my lap, stretching across my arm. Then it tightened. A strangled cry ripped from my throat as I felt it wrap around my wrist, pulling me. I yanked back, my body jerking in my seat, but the cord was strong. Like it wasn't just plastic anymore. Like it had muscle. Like it had will. It pulled harder, dragging my arm toward the back of the RV. Towards whatever was waiting for me in the dark. I thrashed, my breath coming out in frantic, broken gasps. I let go of the wheel for half a second, just long enough to claw at the cord, to try and rip it off. The RV swerved. My tires screeched as the vehicle veered sharply, the headlights flashing wildly against the empty road. For a split second, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A hand, pale, too long, resting lightly on the back of my seat. "Don't look." I forced my gaze forward, yanking the wheel, fighting to steady the RV. With one final, desperate pull, I wrenched my arm free. The cord snapped back, whipping across the dashboard like a retreating snake. I slammed my foot on the gas, and I drove. A town that shouldn't be there. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving. The receiver lay motionless on the seat beside me, the cord now limp, lifeless. My wrist throbbed, an ugly red welt circling the skin where it had been wrapped. I didn't look back. I didn't answer the phone again. I just drove. Hours passed. The sky lightened, shifting from pitch black to a dull, misty gray. Then finally I saw something ahead. Lights. A town. A wave of relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone out here. I pulled off the highway, my hands still shaking. The town was small, one of those quiet roadside places that seemed frozen in time. A main street with a few scattered businesses, a gas station, a diner. I pulled into the parking lot of a motel, and that's when I saw it. A payphone, standing right outside the office. Rusted, yellowed, waiting. I felt sick. I turned off the engine, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. No, I had left it behind. It couldn't have followed me here. I forced myself to look at it, to convince myself it was just a normal, broken payphone. But as I stared at it, my stomach twisted. Because something was wrong. I knew that phone. I had seen it before. The scratches on the metal. The faint graffiti etched into the side. It was the same one from the rest stop. It had moved. Re-thawing. I flinched violently. The phone was ringing. Again. I couldn't escape it. And for the first time, I understood. It didn't matter where I ran. I could keep driving forever. But the phone would always find me. Because the call wasn't coming from the payphone. It was coming from me. The town that wasn't there. I couldn't breathe. The payphone stood in front of the motel office, exactly like the one from the rest stop. Same graffiti. Same yellowed keypad. Same cracked receiver. The same. It moved. The moment that thought sank in, the phone started ringing. Loud. Sharp. Like a scream cutting through the early morning quiet. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. My heart pounded against my ribs, every instinct telling me to drive. Just drive and never stop. But my body wouldn't move. The motel door creaked open. A man stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. His shirt was stained, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in years. He didn't even glance at me. Didn't flinch at the ringing phone, like he didn't hear it. My stomach twisted. He walked right past it, heading toward a car parked near the gas station. The phone kept ringing. No one reacted. Not him. Not the gas station attendant across the street. Not the old woman sweeping the sidewalk. Only I could hear it. The realization slammed into me like a gut punch. This town wasn't normal. I needed to leave. Now. But then, the ringing stopped. Silence. For a split second, I felt relief. Then my RV's engine died. No escape. The lights on my dashboard flickered, then faded to black. The radio cut out. My phone screen went blank. Everything dead. I twisted the key. Nothing. I yanked my phone charger from the port and pressed the power button. The screen stayed dark. The entire RV was dead. My breathing turned ragged. I slammed my hand against the wheel. No. I wasn't trapped here. I couldn't be. I shoved the door open and stumbled onto the pavement, the early morning air chilling my sweat-drenched skin. The street was empty. The motel door was shut again. The gas station across the road looked abandoned, despite the neon, open sign flickering in the window. I turned back to my RV, willing it to start, willing this to just be a bad dream. Then I saw it. The phone cord, slithering under my RV's door. It's inside. I sucked in a sharp breath, stepping backward. No. The cord stretched from the motel payphone, trailing across the pavement like a snake. It shouldn't be that long, but it kept going. The end of it, somewhere inside my RV. I took another step back, then another. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my entire body screaming at me to run. Then the door creaked open, slowly, an inch at a time, like something was pushing it from the inside. I froze. The gap widened, revealing the dim interior of my RV. The smell of something damp and wrong spilled out, curling around me like rotten breath. And then, the phone rang. Inside the RV. A voice I know. I should have run. I wanted to run, but my body wasn't my own anymore. Some unseen force pulled me forward, my feet moving against my will. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stepped up into the RV. It was dark, too dark, like the light had been sucked out of the space entirely. The phone sat on my passenger seat, its receiver off the hook. The cord stretched into the back, into the shadows, and from those shadows I heard a voice. Pick up! It wasn't just any voice. It was mine. I trembled. My throat clenched, while rising in my stomach. I reached for the receiver, my fingers brushing against the plastic. It was wet, sticky. I pulled my hand back, blood. My blood. I looked down. My arms. My chest. My hands. All covered in it. The room spun. My vision blurred, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. And then, the whisper came again. Closer. You already answered. I turned, and I saw me. A face that shouldn't exist. A figure stood in the darkened space at the back of the RV. My face. My eyes. My mouth. But wrong. Its skin sagged, too loose in some places, too tight in others. Its lips barely moved as it whispered. But its eyes. Hollow. Empty. I felt my knees buckle. You picked up the phone, it said, voice rasping. That means you're mine. I shook my head violently. No, this wasn't happening. I turned, bolted for the door. Slam. The door shut on its own, sealing me inside. The RV groaned, the walls breathing around me. The phone rang again. I whipped around, chest heaving, panic turning my limbs ice cold. The thing that looked like me was gone. But something else was there. The shadows at the back of the RV shifted. A figure unfolded from the darkness, long limbs stretching, bones cracking as it straightened. It wasn't human. Too tall. Too thin. Its arms dragged against the floor. A telephone cord wrapped around its body, disappearing into its gaping, cavernous mouth. I wanted to scream. It lunged. The call never ends. I didn't have time to think. I dove for the receiver, gripping it tight. The thing stopped, frozen in place. I pressed the phone to my ear, hands trembling. Static. Then, my own voice. You can't run forever. Tears burned in my eyes. What do you want? I whispered. The voice on the other end laughed. A distorted, broken sound. You already know. And then, silence. I swallowed hard. Then slowly I turned my head. The creature was gone. The RV was normal again. The blood. The cords. The thing wearing my face all gone. Like it had never been there. My breathing was ragged. My hands shook. The phone sat in my lap, its receiver still warm. I slowly lifted my head, and froze. The payphone. No longer outside the motel. It was right outside my RV. Waiting. the receiver hanging loosely from its hook, the words etched into the metal. Answer me. Then, re-thawing. A silence that feels wrong. I didn't touch the phone. Not this time. Not after what I'd just seen. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the payphone standing right outside my RV. It was impossible. It had been at the rest stop, then at the motel, and now it was here, like it was following me. The words scratched into the metal faceplate gleamed under the weak streetlight. Answer me. Then, re-thawing. The sound shattered the silence. I flinched so hard I nearly slammed my knee into the steering wheel. My breathing was uneven, shallow. I knew what would happen if I answered. The thing inside my RV, the voice that sounded like mine, the thing wearing my face. I couldn't let it in again. Couldn't let it win. But as the ringing stretched on, a new, more horrifying thought crept into my mind. What if I already had? What if it was too late? Something is watching me. I forced my gaze away from the phone and checked my surroundings. The town was still. Too still. Not a single car had passed since I arrived. Not a single person had stepped outside. The gas station's neon open sign flickered weakly, but the inside was dark. The streetlights buzzed faintly, but they cast no real light. It felt like the whole world had been painted in wrong shades, like everything was off by just a fraction. Like I was being watched. My skin crawled. I turned back to my RV door, my fingers twitching toward the handle. Then I froze. In the side mirror, a figure, standing behind me. Tall, thin, two long arms. A telephone cord wrapped around its torso, vanishing into the dark, gaping hole of its mouth. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I turned around, I'd see it outside. If I saw it outside, that meant it wasn't trapped in the RV anymore. It meant it was real. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I had to leave. Now, driving into nowhere. I twisted the key in the ignition. For one heart-stopping second, nothing. Then, the engine rumbled to life. My chest caved with relief. I didn't even glance in the mirrors as I slammed my foot on the gas, tearing out of the lot. The RV roared down the empty road, the payphone vanishing in the distance. I kept driving, and driving. No music, no radio, just the sound of the tires rolling over asphalt and my own ragged breathing. The further I got from the town, the better I felt. The tension in my shoulders eased. My grip on the wheel loosened. I checked the clock. 4:17 a.m. I'd drive until sunrise. Then I'd find a new place to stop. Somewhere far. Somewhere safe. I was okay. I was okay. Re-thawing. The sound shattered the quiet. My stomach dropped. No, I left it behind. I didn't answer. It wasn't possible. Re-thawing. I whipped my head toward the passenger seat, and my blood turned to ice. The payphone was inside the RV, sitting on the seat like it had always been there. Receiver off the hook, cord stretching into the back. The shadows behind me shifted. And then, I heard my own voice, whispering, "Where are you going?" "No exit." I slammed the brakes. The RV screeched to a halt, tires skidding across the pavement. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't breathe. The only sound was the distant tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. I slowly turned my head. The payphone sat motionless. The cord still disappeared into the dark, stretching toward the back of the RV. I swallowed, then forced my gaze toward the windshield. My breath caught in my throat. I was back in the same town, the same gas station, the same motel, the same goddamn payphone standing outside. I stared, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't real. It wasn't. I pressed my palm against the window. The glass was cold. The streetlights flickered. A figure stood under one of them, its shadow stretching impossibly long. Watching. Waiting. The payphone inside the RV clicked. The dial tone buzzed in my ears. Then, a voice. Soft. Familiar. "You can't leave." I squeezed my eyes shut. No, this isn't real. I gripped the receiver, my fingers trembling. My voice came out hoarse. "What do you want from me?" A pause. Then, "You already know." The static on the other end shifted. And then, I heard it. The sound of breathing. Not from the phone. From right behind me. The final choice. I knew if I turned around, I'd see it. The thing that had been following me. The thing that had been watching. The thing that had my face. But if I didn't turn around, I'd never know. I'd never escape. I took a shaky breath. The payphone clicked again. A whisper curled through the receiver. "It's your turn to call." The shadows around me thickened. The RV felt smaller, darker, wrong. The road outside didn't exist anymore. Just blackness. Endless blackness. The only thing left in the world was the payphone. And me. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. Then, I lifted the receiver. And I dialed. The numbers burned into my mind, like I had always known them. Like I had been waiting my whole life to make this call. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then, someone picked up. Silence. Then a voice. My voice. I was wondering when you'd call. I closed my eyes. And everything went dark. Next story. I wasn't planning on driving this late. The plan was simple. Get to my uncle's place before sundown, park the RV in his driveway, and have a real meal for the first time in days. Instead, I'd let time slip away, stopping too long at a gas station and messing around with a playlist that wouldn't load. Now I was on some two-lane highway in the middle of nowhere, the only company being the thick walls of towering cornfields on both sides. I wasn't even sure how long it had been since I'd seen another car. Half an hour? An hour? My dashboard clock was stuck, flashing 1:12 a.m., even though I was sure it had been later than that. I told myself it was just an old clock, but that creeping unease started in my gut anyway. The kind that makes you check your mirrors one too many times, expecting to see something that shouldn't be there. The night felt wrong. The kind of quiet that wasn't just an absence of noise, but something more, like the whole world was holding its breath. The road stretched ahead in a perfect, unbroken line, no intersections, no turns, just endless miles of dark pavement and those cornfields. Something about them made my skin crawl. The stalks were too tall, too thick. Even with my headlights, I couldn't see more than a foot or two past the first row. It was like staring into a solid black wall, a hidden world just inches away. I had this bizarre thought that if I were to stop and step out, the corn would close behind me, swallowing me whole. I shook my head. Nope. Not thinking about that. I turned up the radio, static fuzzing in and out as I flipped through stations. Nothing but white noise. A station half caught a song, but the lyrics were garbled, twisting into something that didn't sound quite right, like a voice singing backward. I switched it off. That's when I saw them. The eyes. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just a weird reflection from my headlights catching something deep in the field. Two small red dots, barely visible between the stalks. I blinked. They were gone. My hands tightened on the wheel. I stared straight ahead, watching the road, but I couldn't stop my eyes from flicking to the side, looking for them again. A few more miles passed, and just as I was starting to convince myself that I'd just been seeing things, there, again, two red pinpricks, maybe 20 feet off the road, blinking, watching. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't sure why, but something about them felt wrong, like they weren't just reflections or headlights in the distance. They were focused on me. I swallowed, forcing a laugh. Okay, I muttered, voice shaky. Just some animal. Coyotes or something. The words felt fake the second they left my mouth. I'd seen animal eyes reflect in headlights before, and they never looked like that. They were never so perfectly still. Never that deep, pulsing red. And the worst part, there were more of them now. I wasn't sure when it happened, but the further I drove, the more pairs appeared. Some farther back, just tiny pinpricks, while others were closer, too close. Always just past the first row of stalks, just deep enough that I couldn't see what they belonged to. But they were watching, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I couldn't explain. A primal certainty. Something deep in my gut told me that whatever was in those fields wasn't supposed to be here. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I forced myself to breathe, to not look at them. If I didn't look, they weren't there. If I just focused on the road, I'd pass through the stretch and be somewhere normal. I'd be fine. Then my headlights flickered. For half a second, the road plunged into darkness. And in that half second, the eyes moved. They shifted. Not the way an animal moves, not even like something stepping forward. It was instantaneous. A dozen pairs of eyes jerked closer in unison, like a video skipping forward, frames missing. My breath caught in my throat. No. I slammed my foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward, tires skidding for a moment before catching. My heart was a hammer in my chest, my mind racing. I told myself not to look, but it didn't matter. The eyes were everywhere. A dozen, 2 dozen, more. All the same height, all the same size, all moving at the same impossible pace. They weren't running or creeping forward. Every time my headlights flickered, they skipped closer. My pulse was a roar in my ears. I just knew, if I stopped, if I pulled over, if I so much as hesitated, they would reach the road. And then, a sound cut through the night. A thump against the side of the RV. I nearly swerved off the road. Something had hit me. Not hard enough to dent, not hard enough to rock the vehicle, but enough that I felt it. I didn't look. I would not look. I slammed my foot down harder, the engine growling as I sped forward, praying to see another car, a house, anything, but there was nothing. Just cornfields. Just the road. And the things inside the corn. Then movement. Up ahead, the road curved slightly, dipping into a shadowed stretch. A figure was standing on the shoulder. A man. At first, I felt relief. A real, human person. Someone who could tell me I was losing my mind, that it was all in my head. But as I got closer, the relief twisted into something sharp, something ice-cold. Because he wasn't waving me down. He wasn't moving at all. Just standing. Perfectly still. The moment my headlights hit him, I saw it. His eyes. Red. Not like the others. Not like pinpricks in the dark. His were full, glowing orbs, staring straight into mine. My hands jerked on the wheel. The RV swerved slightly, but I didn't stop, didn't slow. The man's mouth moved, just slightly, like he was whispering something. I didn't hear it. Didn't want to. I tore my gaze away, forcing my foot down as hard as it would go. The RV groaned, shuddering with the speed. I half expected to feel another thump against the side, to see those eyes surrounding the road. But I didn't, because as suddenly as it had begun, the road was empty again. The cornfields were still there, stretching on forever. But when I risked a glance at the side window, the eyes were gone. Nothing but the dark. I let out a breath, my hands aching from how hard I was gripping the wheel. My heart felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't slow down. I kept driving. And in the back of my mind, one thought echoed over and over. I don't think I left them behind. I think they just let me go. For now. I kept driving. I had no other choice. The road stretched endlessly, and I didn't dare slow down. My hands still shook on the wheel, my knuckles stiff from gripping it too tight. I told myself over and over, I was safe now. The eyes were gone. That man, whatever he was behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The darkness behind me looked the same as before, just an empty road cutting through an ocean of corn. But I knew better now. Empty didn't mean safe. Empty didn't mean alone. I swallowed hard and turned up the radio. Still nothing. Just static. I flipped through the stations desperately, searching for anything. A song, a voice, even some late-night preacher warning about the end of the world. But all I got was more static, waves of white noise hissing through the speakers like distant whispers. Then, a voice. Faint, crackling, buried under the static. My fingers froze over the dial. Seeing you. I went cold. Eyes in the corn, not alone watching. The words warped in and out, the voice distant and strange, like someone speaking through layers of distortion. Then, just as suddenly, the station went silent. I reached for the dial again, but before I could touch it, the static roared back. Louder this time. Deafening. I flinched, slamming the radio off. The RV plunged into eerie silence again, leaving only the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I didn't turn it back on. I didn't want to hear whatever was waiting for me on that frequency. I forced my eyes forward, trying to focus on the road, but my mind was racing. The longer I drove, the more the questions started clawing at me. What the hell did I see back there? What were those things in the corn? And more importantly, where the hell was I? I reached for my phone, still sitting on the passenger seat, and pressed the power button. No signal. Not even a single bar. I glanced at the dashboard again. The clock was still frozen at 1:12 a.m. My gut twisted. That wasn't possible. I'd been driving for at least another 20 minutes, maybe longer. But the time hadn't changed. The road hadn't changed either. The more I looked at it, the more it felt wrong. It wasn't just empty. It was identical. Same cracks in the pavement. Same slight bend every few hundred feet. The same damn cornfields. It was like I was driving in circles without ever turning. No. I shook my head, gripping the wheel harder. That's just paranoia talking. I haven't passed the same spot. I haven't. Then, a sign. I almost didn't believe it at first. It was just a wooden road marker on the side of the highway, barely visible in the dark. But it was something different. As I got closer, I squinted to read it. Welcome to Ashdown, POP 1137. My stomach sank. That wasn't right. I had passed that exact sign over an hour ago. No. No, no, no. That was impossible. I slammed the brakes. The RV groaned as it skidded to a stop, the sudden silence almost deafening. I leaned forward, staring at the sign like it might disappear if I looked away. But it didn't. Welcome to Ashdown, POP 1137. I was back where I started. I clenched my teeth, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't turn around. I had driven straight this whole time. I had never made a turn, never even slowed down. So how the hell was I here again? Something was very, very wrong with this road. A cold sweat prickled down my spine. I needed to get off this highway. Now. I checked the gas gauge, half a tank. Enough to keep going. I had no idea where this road actually led anymore, but one thing was certain. I wasn't staying here. I threw the RV into drive and pressed down on the gas. The sign blurred past in my peripheral vision as I sped forward. But the second I hit 60 miles per hour, something moved in the corn. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A figure. Tall. Thin. Stepping out from the stalks. I barely had time to react before it lunged toward the road. Thud. Something hit the side of the RV. I swerved violently, tires screeching against the pavement. My breath caught in my throat as I fought to regain control. The RV veered dangerously close to the edge, gravel kicking up beneath the wheels. I yanked the wheel, forcing the RV back onto the road. My chest heaved. What the hell just happened? My shaking hands fumbled to adjust the mirrors, my stomach twisting in knots as I looked at the side of the RV. There was no dent, no damage, but I had felt it. Something had hit me. I swallowed hard and flicked my gaze to the side window. The cornfield was empty. No sign of whatever had stepped out. My mind was screaming at me to drive, to get the hell out of here before something worse happened. But then, just as I was about to press my foot to the gas, the radio turned itself back on. I froze. It was still on the same static-filled station as before. But this time, the voice was clearer. Don't stop. My heart nearly stopped in my chest. Keep going. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't a recording. It was real. I lunged for the dial and shut the radio off, my breath coming in short gasps. I wasn't alone in here. The thought sent ice through my veins. I reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror. Something was sitting in the back of the RV. I barely registered what I was seeing before my instincts took over. My foot slammed on the gas, the RV roaring forward. My hands were shaking violently as I gripped the wheel, refusing to look in the mirror again. I knew what I saw, and I couldn't look at it again. Not now. Not yet. The road blurred past in a rush of pavement and shadows, the cornfields stretching endlessly on either side. But I didn't care anymore. I just needed to keep going. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not with that thing behind me. I didn't check the mirror again. I couldn't. I just kept driving, my knuckles aching from how hard I gripped the wheel. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, but my mind wasn't focused on that anymore. It was focused on the thing in the RV, the thing I saw sitting in the back for just a split second. I wanted to believe I imagined it, that it was a trick of the dim lighting, a shadow cast by something I left lying around. But I knew better. It was there. I had seen it. A hunched figure, motionless, its face hidden in the dark, and it was still here with me. The thought sent ice crawling up my spine, but I couldn't lose control. I had to stay rational. I had to think. I reached for my phone again, just to feel like I was doing something. Still no signal. The battery icon flickered, 23% left. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. I could use the flashlight. If it came down to it, I could shine the light in the back and see, whatever it was. But something inside me screamed not to do it. Because if I looked, if I really saw it, there would be no going back. A part of me knew that once I acknowledged it, once I laid my eyes on that thing properly, this would turn into something else entirely. So I did the only thing I could. I kept my eyes forward. The road hummed beneath the tires, the steady drone of the RV's engine the only sound. But then, a new noise. Faint at first. Barely there. A wet, rasping breath. I stiffened. My entire body locked up. It was coming from behind me. A slow, deliberate inhale. Then an even slower exhale. Like something was waiting. I clamped my teeth together, so hard my jaw ached. My fingers twitched near my phone, hovering over the flashlight option. But I still couldn't do it. I couldn't turn around. Instead, I focused on the road ahead. Just keep driving. Just keep moving. Don't acknowledge it. Don't listen. but the breathing didn't stop. It was closer now. The air in the RV felt thicker, tighter, like the space behind me was shrinking. I adjusted my grip on the wheel, trying to steady my hands. The temperature inside felt different, too. My skin was prickling, like I had just stepped into a cold basement. Then, a whisper. So soft I almost thought I imagined it. Stop. I swallowed hard. It had spoken. I wasn't imagining it anymore. There was no more denying it. Something was in here with me. I pressed the gas pedal down harder. The RV lurched forward on the empty road. The cornfields blurred past in my peripheral vision, but I didn't care about them anymore. The real horror wasn't outside. It was inside. The whisper came again, but clearer this time. Right behind me. I see you. I flinched. My breath caught in my throat, panic clawing up my chest. I almost turned around, but before I could, the headlights flickered. For a split second, the road ahead was swallowed in darkness. I gasped, gripping the wheel tighter. The lights flickered again, off, then back on, casting unnatural shadows along the pavement. Something moved up ahead. My pulse skyrocketed. I wasn't sure what I saw at first. Just a shape. A silhouette standing in the middle of the road. Tall, unmoving. But then I saw the eyes. Glowing red pinpricks, watching me from the dark. The same ones I had seen before. But this time, they weren't in the corn. They were on the road, standing directly in my path. I stomped on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. My body lurched forward from the sudden stop, my seatbelt locking hard against my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring. My breathing came in fast, shallow bursts. I could barely think over the sound of my own heartbeat. The headlights flickered again. For a second, asterisk asterisk, just a second, asterisk asterisk, it disappeared. But when the lights came back on, it was closer. I sucked in a sharp breath. It hadn't walked. It hadn't moved. It had just shifted. Now it was standing directly in front of the RV. The glowing red eyes bore into me, unblinking. I couldn't see its face. Just a dark shape, wrapped in shadows that didn't match the rest of the night. The air around it seemed wrong, warped, like reality itself was bending to accommodate it. Then, it tilted its head, slow, unnatural, like a puppet on broken strings. A shudder racked through my body. My brain screamed at me to hit the gas, to plow through whatever the hell this thing was and just go. But before I could move, the RV door unlocked. Click. A quiet sound, a simple sound, but it froze me to my core. My eyes darted to the passenger door. It was still shut, but the lock had popped open on its own. Click. The second lock. Click. The third. My breath caught in my throat. I watched, paralyzed, as the last lock slid open with an unnatural slowness. Then, the door handle turned. I screamed. I didn't even think. My body reacted on pure instinct. I slammed my foot against the gas. The tires screeched, the RV lunging forward. The thing in the road didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just watched as I drove straight through it. For a split second, everything went black. The RV shuddered violently. I lost control of the wheel for half a second, the whole vehicle jerking, as if I had just driven through solid stone. Then silence. The headlights flickered back on. The road stretched ahead of me again, empty and endless. The thing was gone. I gasped for breath, my whole body trembling. I reached up to wipe the sweat off my forehead, and that's when I noticed something. My hand was shaking. Not just from fear, not just from adrenaline. It was covered in dirt. No, not just dirt. Corn husks. Like I had been dragged through the field. Like I had been out there. But that wasn't possible. I had been in here. I had never left the RV. I had never stopped. Had I? I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the wheel so tight my fingernails dug into my palms. I had to keep going. I had to get the hell off this road. But deep down, I was starting to realize something. I wasn't sure if I was really in the RV anymore, or if I had ever made it out of that cornfield at all. The headlights flickered again. For a split second, the road ahead was swallowed in complete darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles aching. When the lights came back on, my stomach twisted. The cornfield was gone. No stalks, no fence, no road signs, just a yawning black void. I jerked my head side to side, my chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. My headlights barely reached past 10 feet before dissolving into emptiness. The road was still beneath me, but it looked wrong. The asphalt stretched too far. The lines in the middle flickered like an old film reel, constantly shifting. And then, The eyes came back. Dozens. No, hundreds. Glowing red pinpricks lining the darkness on both sides of the road. Motionless. Watching. My pulse skyrocketed. They weren't just in the corn anymore. They were everywhere. Then, the radio crackled to life. The same warped, buzzing voice from before. "You can't leave." I shuddered. My hands sweated against the wheel. The road wasn't real. I was driving in nothing. "Get out!" I swallowed hard, my eyes darting to the GPS screen. It was blank. I tried the phone. No service. I stared ahead at the endless stretch of impossible road, my gut screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I had to keep going. I pressed the gas. The RV lurched forward. The headlights carved a tunnel through the blackness, illuminating only more eyes. But then, something stepped into the road. A shadowy figure materialized in front of me, barely human. My foot slammed the brakes. The RV skidded, tires shrieking. My body lurched forward, seatbelt digging into my chest. The whole vehicle shuddered to a stop. And the thing in front of me, it didn't move. I stared, heart hammering. It had the shape of a man, but its head was all wrong. Stretched too tall, limping to one side. And then it turned. Slow, unnatural. Red eyes bore into mine. Not just one pair. Dozens. Layered over each other, blinking in unnatural patterns. Like something wearing a human shape, but unable to hide what it really was. My chest seized. My throat locked. And then, it moved. Not by stepping forward. It shifted. 1 second it was standing 10 feet away. The next, it was right next to my window. "Stop, please." The car slowed. My breath hitched as it pulled closer. An old sedan, engine humming softly. The driver's side window rolled down. And then, I saw my own face staring back at me. Expressionless. Eyes glowing red. I staggered backward, my throat locking. "No," I whispered. "No, this can't be." The other me tilted his head. He raised a hand. And waved. Just like I had. Just like I was doing right now. The red eyes blinked. And then, everything went black.